Designing the world we live in. It's the Tell Me More podcast. Join us as we celebrate the people who shape our communities and our lives. Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we have Evon Calabrese joining us all the way from Portland, Oregon. Yvonne is the healthcare designer and medical planner at NBBJ, where she specializes in behavioral healthcare environments. Yvonne is also active with the AIA National Associates Committee, AIA Academy of Architecture for Health, and the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. Welcome to our podcast, Yvonne. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a few months, but I'm glad we could all make the time.
Yes.
I know we also have a little bit of time difference, so I'm happy we could make this work.
Because which are we? I know we're between East Coast and I'm on the West Coast.
Yes, I think we've got a 3-hour time difference. So glad you could wake up really early Sunday morning to do this.
Happy to.
So, Yvonne, it sounds like you have a really, really impressive resume. You're part of all of these committees. You're doing a lot of work in healthcare architecture. How did you get started? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and even how you got started in the architecture industry?
Totally. So I, for the longest time, thought I would never go into architecture, actually, specifically. I was raised by actually an architect and landscape architect. My parents had a small practice when I was a kid in rural Vermont, so mostly doing second homes. So I thought I knew what architecture was, and it seemed really stressful. And I wasn't interested. I was always very artistic, but I was never interested in drawing buildings. I like to draw people. So I went to art school knowing I wanted to study design and some type of environmental design, but adamant I did not want to study architecture. But then I fell into the architecture program. I think I just had to move away from my parents, get some independence, and then realize that was actually what I was interested in. But then once I was in the architecture program, I got really interested in environmental sustainability. I went to Mass Art in Boston. I was there from 2008 to 2013. So that's kind of environmental sustainability is still obviously really important, but it was very popular. It was what we were all talking about, we were all learning about. And I did the solar decathlon, which is a really cool competition that's still happening I'm not sure where it happens now, but was in Washington, D.C. We design and build a 1,000 square foot home, completely net zero. And that's why I stayed on for an extra year at Mass Art, because I took some time off to participate in that competition. And I knew this was all really important. This sustainability movement was so important, but it just wasn't interesting to me. It just didn't get me excited doing this energy modeling. I pursued Passive House certification, and I knew it was important, but I just wasn't interested in it. So I graduated, and it was the height of the recession, and I had a bachelor's of fine art in architecture in Boston. So there were no jobs for me. I hung around for a while. I hung around actually for about a year and a half, just trying to get a job anywhere I could, working at my part-time job turned to full-time at the frozen yogurt shop. And I ultimately moved back to Vermont after a year and a half of not being able to get a job in the architecture field. Worked for my parents for a little bit, which I'm really grateful I had that to fall back on, and then got a job at a mid-sized firm in Burlington, Vermont. So that's really where I started my career. And then that's when I started to learn about the concepts of social sustainability. I think it just started to become a bit more of a conversation. And I realized that there was this other path within architecture. It wasn't just environmental sustainability, but you could focus on the health and wellness of the inhabitants, and actually this idea of environmental psychology. So when I went to graduate school, I went with the intention of studying that. That's what brought me out to University of Oregon, then got me involved with the Build Health lab, where I got to use biofeedback sensors and really get into really kind of diving into that field. But it still wasn't, it was something I definitely had to specialize in myself. We had some human studies courses, but the whole idea of neuroscience in architecture wasn't available at the academic level yet. So again, when I came out of school, out of University of Oregon, I had a hard time finding a job. I think at that point I was overqualified a bit, and I had 2-3 years experience, a master's degree. I'd kind of specialized. I'd gotten this fellowship. And so it took me a bit, again, to find my first job. I ended up working at a small firm here in Portland that does primarily residential and small commercial. So it was literally what my parents did. We were working in Vectorworks, which I also didn't love, but it was a great firm. The firm itself was awesome. The owners were really wonderful. And they knew that wasn't the type of work that I was wanting to do, but they needed someone, I needed a job. And so that pushed me to start looking for other avenues that I could do the work I wanted to do, because I wasn't able to do it in my current career. So that's why I pursued AIA Oregon and getting involved. And that then turned into meeting more folks and getting involved with the National Associates Committee, and then also pursuing, that's actually what led me then to my first healthcare job. And from there, so it's really been looking for those opportunities and getting them for myself, because I wasn't in a position where I was getting them myself. So I then worked for a mid-sized healthcare firm for about 3 years, which was great experience. And then now I just recently, in this last month, joined NBBJ in their Portland studio. And so I'm so excited. I feel like now I'm finally where I've been trying to get for these last 10 years when I got my undergraduate degree, and I just wanted to work at a firm that was doing really cool work. And it took a long time and a lot of personal investment. But I finally just got there last month.
That's so amazing. And that's such a journey. And I feel like most people would have given up and been like, there's not a job for me. I'm just going to do what falls in my lap and keep doing these residential projects or whatever projects that they don't really find that fulfillment in. So, that's very exciting that you did kind of push through and try to find a space, and a really great testament to what AIA does to someone who's early on in their career, and even later in their career, where if they don't have the fulfillment, they can make those connections. And honestly, totally, I agree with that, because my recent job, that I found it through AIA and my AIA connection. So that's really great to hear that being involved is not a waste of time like a lot of people think. It is really an investment in yourself and your professional journey and your growth. So that's really exciting. Congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, something that I definitely had to do, because my last job, I went to a lot of conferences, and I had people asking how I was able to go to all these conferences. And the reality was I was paying for them out of pocket and using vacation time. And I just kind of gave myself a budget of what I was going to invest in myself. And that budget did go on a credit card. I didn't have that that cash flow. It's something I'm now paying off. But I just went to, and I had to be strategic, not go to everything, be smart about what types of events I went to. But I just kept showing up at those events that people just thought I must be someone. And I kept forcing myself to go introduce myself to these people who I kept reading about and seeing videos. And then they just kind of assumed I had this position that I wanted. And that was really what I think got me here, was even though my firm wasn't an ability, they did support me some. I don't want to say they didn't ever pay, but I went to a lot of conferences and they weren't going to pay for all of those. But that is really what got my foot in the door, was just making that personal investment. And it was a chunk of money, and it was all my vacation time. But I'm now taking a break from going to conferences for a little bit, because I've gotten that, made that big step, or at least in person.
But you're right. It's an investment.
It is.
That's a really good way to put it, where it's not just going to conferences and meeting people. It's an investment in your future and in the path that you want to eventually take and end up in.
Mm-hmm.
So earlier, I know you and I spoke briefly, and you mentioned that the key word that you mentioned was trauma-informed design.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's an evolution of what you do now as a healthcare designer and medical planner. But can you talk a little bit about what trauma-informed design is and how it led you into the position, the career that you have today?
Totally. So the idea of trauma-informed design, it's probably been around for about 7 years. It's a term that people have been doing trauma-informed design for a long time. It just wasn't necessarily a coined term, but the term comes from the concept of trauma-informed care, which was developed by, oh gosh, it's the longest acronym, but SAMHSA, I believe.
SAMHSA?
SAMHSA?
Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration?
Yes, that one.
Yes.
So they developed the concept of trauma-informed care, which is essentially the idea of understanding how trauma impacts people and how their body and their mind might respond to trauma. So this is especially talking about like healthcare providers or teachers, and recognizing if someone's having a trauma response, rather than just like getting frustrated with them and trying to get them to do what you need to do, to recognize that and adjust maybe how you interact with that person or perform the exam in a way to not re-traumatize them. So the way that then extends to architecture is creating spaces that support that. As the idea is, our environments directly impact part of what we're feeling and what our body's experiencing. So the idea of if we can create environments that help people with self-regulation, that it'll support that whole process. I think of it as one of those things where I consider myself highly sensitive to space. I think most people who do this work are highly sensitive to space. That's why we get into this work. But almost all people, or I would say all people, feel better when they're in a space that's designed well, even if they don't necessarily feel bad when they're in a space that isn't designed well. And design well isn't purely aesthetics. What it means is having a space that's clearly legible, that you can like see and make sense of, where you feel safe, that's clean and well maintained. So those are kind of more of the things we're talking about. But what I especially love about trauma-informed design is it combines ideas of kind of like neuroarchitecture, which is a big term, but this idea of like the neuroscience in architecture, but also honoring the lived experience of the individuals and actually bringing them on as consultants, essentially, to learn about how they experience the space and how to design a space for them. The big misconception about trauma-informed design is that we can create these hard and fast rules that apply to everyone, that you can just come in and kind of apply blanketly. And there are things we can learn from other projects and other populations and definitely apply it to build off past knowledge. Blue is not appropriate as a calming color for everyone. And that's the thing, we kind of get into these hard rules, that it's really important to take into account the cultural implications, the background, that specific community, because some of these solutions may not be appropriate for them, or might be highly specific for specific populations. So some examples of that, when the most common example for trauma-informed design, kind of the classic one, is the laundry room. It started out, the idea of trauma-informed design started when designing for people experiencing homelessness, so designing homeless shelters. And the idea of creating a laundry room that could double as a hangout space, a gym, a library, with the understanding that folks who live on the street may be extra protective of their belongings when doing laundry. Just because if that's their whole life there, they're going to want to, they're not going to want to just leave their items unattended in the laundry room. So rather than having this cramped little closet, to just make it a space where they can hang out while their laundry is being done. So that's like the most kind of classic. That was how we described trauma-informed design for a long time. Some other examples are when designing for children who are maybe traumatized. So this would be, say, designing a children's advocacy center where if a child experienced a crime or was something, they could go there and talk to police, healthcare providers, social workers, kind of everyone they need to in a child-friendly environment. You would not want to have automatic flushing toilets or hand dryers, because when a kid's already stressed out and traumatized, those are just going to stress them out even more. So avoiding those types of things in these environments for traumatized children. Another example that I loved is a domestic violence shelter here in Portland. It's like a day shelter. It's a place where people can go, specifically women and gender minorities can go if they're living on the streets or experiencing domestic violence. And they have an exam room right off of their main kind of living area that's separated by just a half wall and a curtain. So I would not feel comfortable getting examined in that space. I want to know I have total privacy, that no one can hear my conversation with the doctor. But someone who's been assaulted is likely going to feel a lot more comfortable knowing they can hop over that half wall and through that curtain into where all the people are rather than being in an enclosed space. So that's been highly utilized, and it's been really successful. And I think just a really great example of a solution for when dealing with people with those types of traumas.
Well, those are some great examples, though. I think I ever thought of them as like, especially the laundry room that you spoke about. That's pretty insightful. I never thought about it as being a trauma-based design, And I think, well, so you spoke about your life, right? You spoke about how you went through all of these ups and downs, and then you finally at a place where you are excited to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also told us some examples about what trauma-based design is. And I want to ask this now. Actually, this question was supposed to be later, but I think I want to bring it up now. So, what does success look like to you? So, and I asked this. It can be like your personal life success and also your work life success. But like now that you're here, and then you have these entire like resources at your disposal for like going ahead, what would that look like to you?
So I think success looks like a few different things. One, getting to be able to do what I love every day, I think is a success. I mean, in the beginning of my career, I definitely enjoyed, well, let me say, I was, no, it was pretty rough just doing drafting. I was going to say there were days where it was brutal. Just,
Yeah. Oh my God.
Reminds
Yeah.
reminds you why you didn't want to do architecture in the first
yes.
place.
I was going to say, I still, and I mean, that's one of those things I do still enjoy, like getting into Revit and putting on a podcast and doing some drafting. But when that's all I was doing, I was like, what am I doing? But then I get to go and I get to meet with clients, or meet with user groups, and I like feel high afterwards. I'm just like buzzing. It's like this like energy afterwards because I get so excited. And so when that becomes more of my week and I realize that's kind of more what I'm doing, then I find that really I feel successful. I think the other thing that has just started happening, I think I mentioned how I kept putting myself out there. I am not generally an extroverted person. I can be extroverted in small spurts, but it takes, at this point, I'm pretty good at just firing off LinkedIn messages of being like, hey, your work's really inspiring. Like, could we chat sometime or could I learn about what you do? But at conferences, it took a lot to go up and introduce myself to someone. And that's now starting to happen to me. I'm now having people reach out to me on LinkedIn saying that they're be like, this might be really weird and like, sorry if I'm overstepping. And I'm like, no, I do this all the time. Like, I just did this yesterday. And so the fact that now I'm someone that people are reaching out to, it's just so gratifying. And I regularly am having coffee with emerging professionals in the area, just kind of telling them this, like how I got to where I am because they're interested in a similar type of career. So I finally shed the term emerging professional. I've been part of the emerging professional committee, and it's one of those, I mean, in architecture, we're emerging for so long. So I'm now,
I think we're emerging forever.
I know. And I like honestly didn't love the term emerging professional because I feel like I've been a professional for a while now, but it's just the common term. I care about the group. And so I did actually just at our past AIA Honor Awards get our Emerging Professional Award, which was a big honor because I've been involved with the group for a while, but being able to now officially pass that baton, was that such a great way to get involved too, to like meet firms, because we do a monthly social hour. So it's an awesome way to just like get involved in the community. And so now that I have this whole cohort of this emerging professional group that's going to take this on, also this is like feels really special and surreal. And I'm so proud of them.
That's so amazing. And congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, that's a lot of work that you're already doing, and it's always great to be recognized for something that you're so passionate about. I think it's really also inspiring that, earlier on when you talked about how you got into architecture, you talked about liking working with people, and you didn't want to be the one drawing houses, but you wanted to kind of be involved with people. And it's nice to see how that has transitioned into the work that you do now,
Mm-hmm.
that people are so important in this entire process of your professional journey. Like that's the center of everything that you do. So it's really nice to see that passion has been carried on and maybe even evolved more than you had thought,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still kind of the center of what you care about and what your passion is, and then you're going to continue doing that. So I think that's really great to hear.
Thank you.
Well, I want to say I like the part when you said energy modeling is not attractive. I'm like, yes, it's not. I agree. It's so I'm like it's supposed to be, but it's not. It's really dumb.
Sorry.
People on my team who are passionate about that. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
I just don't want to be doing it.
yeah. I've
There's a
tried
room for
even the
everyone's
wind.
passion.
Right, and even the wind load, the wind movement, like that amazing graphic that pops up. I'm like, well, it's not speaking to me, you guys. It's supposed to be good, but it's not. So let's move on. Yeah,
I think
I think
what's
that was.
so awesome is that there can be such different types of designers and different types of architects. And when I was undergrad, especially, I saw kind of the one, what we call designer with a capital D, as someone said that to me and I loved it. So I'm stealing it. But the idea,
Wait, what does that mean?
I've never heard that.
so,
Yeah, I've never heard this either.
so I think the people who were my idols in undergrad, I think would be examples of this. So Joshua Prince Ramus, Bjork Ingles, Zaha, just these like they're all like in the black.
Oh.
I mean, I'm wearing a dark turtleneck right now, so I'm not. But
Architects, is that what
yes,
you mean?
these architects, but they're the
Those
who are
guys.
always like doing the napkins sketches, and I've worked and like we need people like this. Like we need the person with the leather bound portfolio that's like the odd size and all like hyper design and a really expensive like graphite pencil. But we don't not everyone needs to be that type of a designer. And that's the type of designer I was trying to be. Like I was dressing really severe and had this like overly designed portfolio that was all black and never printed well. And I would always try to like, and so it was just a nightmare. And that's what part of the reason why I wasn't getting jobs initially is I wasn't being authentic to myself. And I was putting out what I thought an architect was and what I thought was cool. And so then when I just became, and so then I kind of went down the environmental route, and that's who I thought I was supposed to be. And so just every time I've done my portfolio, it's gotten more and more simple. And now it is just 8.5 by 11, really clean and simple. It has a bunch of research in there. It's like a mix of design projects, but also like research and analysis, because ultimately that's the type of designer I want to be. And the type of architect I want to be is more of the like citizen architect and the person who's good at facilitating and storytelling and leading community engagement sessions. And I know I'm not the person doing incredible party sketches on a napkin, and I'm okay with that. I used to be really self-conscious about that I wasn't the one making these like really crazy big move, bold architecture designs. And I realize now that that's okay. And I'm actually really content not being that person on the team and actually being more of kind of the people person. And that's where medical planning kind of falls in, is being the person kind of more in the beginning stages and working with all different types of designers and realizing that we all don't have to be this one like starchitect type of designer. And that's just been, gosh, one of the best parts of just like growing, maturing, I guess, in this profession.
Yes.
I think,
Yeah.
well, I guess, well, I think you bring about a great point, and it's important for all of the students coming out of the colleges right now to understand that I think you have to work towards your strengths and your uniqueness, and that's what will help you prosper, like, be successful,
Mm-hmm.
right, in this industry. What that would have been a question that I want to ask later, but thank you for bringing that up. But
Yeah.
yes.
I think just you mentioned being authentic, and I think that's the best thing to do for yourself. Now and in the long run, just being understanding of what your strengths are, where your passion is. Because if you don't enjoy what you do, you're not going to be happy and you're not going to do the best work that's going to come out of you. So I think just trying to understand that really early on is so important. And it sounds like you understood it right at the gate, like even before you started architecture school, where you knew you wanted to work with people. And here we are, that's kind of follow through on that passion will land you in the right place.
Thank you. There was definitely a period when I was doing Soul Decathlon where I was not happy, and I was actually, I think I just sent some of my professors like some apology notes afterwards, like just thinking that since we were working in Revit, that we were doing a collaborative model in Revit, that I knew how to do a construction document set. And I was like, well, I've done a CD set. And I think back, I'm just like, oh God, like there's
what was I doing?
But luckily, I don't think I was actually as bad as I thought, because all my professors were like, what are you talking about? Like, you were great. Like, I only have great memories of you. And I definitely went, and that's when I was insecure. I was insecure about my place in the department, about my future in it. And so, yeah, I was just overcompensating with being pretty arrogant and thinking that because I was on the solo decathlon competition, I was better than all my classmates.
At least you're aware now.
I was, and I did.
You're aware now.
Yes,
Self-awareness.
I had the awareness before I graduated, so I was able to actually have a really great heart-to-heart with my cohort, and that was really important because they were just like, "Yeah, you were off the rails for a little bit."
It's growth, right? Self-awareness is growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to ask, and you mentioned it way earlier that you said you weren't an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
And now, given the position that you are in now, doing like going to conferences, being involved on boards, presenting at conferences, doing community engagement and facilitating all these meetings, how do you pivot from your personal, introvertness into all of these roles that kind of demand you to be outgoing and speaking up all the time?
That's a great question. I mean, something I've learned for conferences is I learned that I just have to get my own accommodations. I need to have my own hotel space. Early on, I would share, and sometimes that's okay. But even especially those big conferences, I just know I need to kind of have my wind down time. And to be able to just be in a room by myself is really important for myself to just kind of get, because I think the problem is I tend to absorb, or not a problem, it's just something about me, is I absorb other people's energy. So when I'm around other people, I'm just naturally absorbing their energy, and it can get overwhelming. So just being alone really helps me kind of reset, and being really careful about not overdoing it. So I did, when I was initially getting into this work, I said yes to everything, and I did get super burnt out. And so now I'm trying to be, and I don't feel like I need to say yes to everything now, which is great. I feel like I can say no to some things and opportunities will still come around. And I can be a bit more strategic with my time. But that was a big thing, is I had to stop saying yes to everything because I just get so excited. But really just being mindful of where I'm at. I mean, even I think everyone became more in tune with themselves after the lockdown. I've always known that I'm a pretty sensitive person, but definitely after lockdown, going back into the world, I found that I was much more sensitive to external stimuli and just other people. And that's adjusted now. I mean, the first the first AIA competition. I'm even saying again, the first AIA national conference I went to after lockdown in San Francisco was so overwhelming. And granted, I didn't know very many people there. Now, this most recent one I went to was great. And I was able to go out and eat with people afterwards and be more social and just feel more comfortable. But I think that was a combination of getting more comfortable being in those settings again and knowing a lot more people at it.
I think part of it also, like, from the more I hear from you, I feel like a lot of experiences and the life you had when you were growing up plays into kind of what you're doing now. And it may be the reason you do what you do now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like some of that has like translated to your work and why you do want to be more cognizant about the places that you design because you've experienced them differently than other people might have?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially like since I'm in trauma from design, people are like, "So what's your trauma?" is like the question.
Yeah.
So because I'm so
That
in
wasn't
childhood
one of
trauma,
ours,
yeah.
but
No,
I think that's the name of your next book.
and
what's your trauma? I love that.
Yeah.
and mine honestly is I did not have a traumatic childhood. I would not say my childhood was dysfunctional. I say I love a lot of people who had traumatic childhoods, and I'm kind of the next removed generation. So luckily, I didn't get traumatized. I was just surrounded by traumatized people, and it made me very curious and a bit anxious. But my parents both, I think like a lot of people our age, my parents grew up in highly, highly dysfunctional, high conflict households. So they did everything they could with the tools they had to create a low conflict household. I think they overcorrected a little bit and were conflict avoidant. And so there were times where, but I prefer that over a household where people are
Right.
screaming, where parents are screaming at each other. Like that was a much calmer, better environment to grow up in. And I realized a lot of, I think, my anxiety stemmed from actually hearing stories specifically about my dad's childhood. Because I have all these deep abandonment, like anxieties that don't correlate with my childhood. Like I never went through anything like that, but my dad did. And he would tell lighthearted stories about that just because that's how he coped with it. And so in my head, if your mom becomes mentally ill, she'll stop taking care of you. So then when my mom went through her own bout of depression, I immediately thought that's what was going to happen. And that's not what happened at all. But it's taken, I mean, that's something I just figured out in this last few years, that's where that stems from. And so it's something I've always been really curious about and just like understanding people better and why they react the way they act and why I am the way I am, because I always felt so ashamed as a kid for the level of anxiety I had because I knew I had a really nice childhood and a nice home life. And so it didn't feel like it matched. So I've always been trying to figure out where that comes from. And I think a big part of it is just being highly sensitive. But also then kind of taking on, these, the emotions of the folks around me. But when I think back to some of my most anxious memories, it was in elementary school, generally when I had to get picked up, when it was like something, a difference in the day. So this was a Memorial Day parade. And so my parents were supposed to meet me at the school, and it alternated which cemetery went to in our tiny town. There was a cemetery on this side of the town and a cemetery on this side of the town. And I told my parents the wrong cemetery. And so I thought they would never, that I would just be.
That was it.
That was it. And I lived walking distance from the school. But when I think of that, I can picture my gymnasium. I can picture the ceiling of the gymnasium. I can see the floor, the walls, because that was the space I was in when I was panicking. And I knew it was silly. When someone asked me why I was crying, I said I was crying because of the troops, because I knew it was like third grade. Like I knew it was unreasonable to get that upset. But the environments we're in do directly correlate to those memories. So basically, if you think of a memory, like an intense memory, it's kind of impossible to picture that without picturing the environment you were in when it happened. So most people, if they're over the age of, I'm 34, so if they're kind of around my age or older, if you say, where were you when 9/11 happened? Most people can tell you exactly where they were. And I know exactly what classroom I was in. And that's because our memories are tied to those so closely to the environment they happened in. So if you're traumatized in, say, prison, if you go to prison, have a traumatic experience there, which I think most people do who are there, especially in more highly secure prisons, then if all of a sudden you're in a hospital that looks like a prison and has the same fixtures as a prison, that's all of a sudden going to reignite all those feelings you felt while you were incarcerated. And so that's where one way that we try to reduce those triggers and not create spaces that look like spaces where people were traumatized.
So how does that play into you being a medical planner now? Because that does sound like a pretty big pivot, but still in the healthcare sector. So how has all that experience kind of helped you become this medical planner and like specialize in healthcare environments?
Totally. So part of it is learning the questions to ask, and kind of there's this framework, this trauma informed design framework, that was developed. I can share some really great resources with you all to share with the community. But Shopworks Architects in I believe they're based in Denver. They're in Colorado, but they kind of were the first to put out maybe not the exact word, but they put out a really incredible framework specifically for designing multifamily housing and shelters. But when doing healthcare projects, really what it starts with is figuring out who the user group is. Oftentimes that is, we call them like our stakeholders, which is not a great term. We're looking for a new term, but that's kind of the industry standard term, but it does not have great historical connotations. But that would be like the CEO, the administrators of the hospital, but then talking to the clinical staff. So kind of that frontline staff who really understands the patients, ideally getting to talk to some patients. So an example of how this was a project actually before joining NBBJ, a substance treatment facility, but from talking to their peer counselors and the staff, we learned some ways. We learned that the times in the process, the intake process, when people are most likely to become agitated. Because we had very limited budgets. We knew if we were going to make some spaces kind of extra special and give them some extra care, we wanted to put them in the places where people were going to use them or get the most use out of them. So for our intake room, we made sure that there was a nice view of a courtyard and an extra some extra artwork in that space to give people some positive distraction. In our dining room, which we know there tends to be a lot of, or not a lot, but people are more likely to be agitated around meal times. There we have a mural of a forest, and it's specifically from human perspective, looking from the edge into a medium density forest of the area. And that was what our research showed to be the most calming. And then using some warm tones for the paint. That's the only place we use kind of a peachy orange color, because there is science showing that orange and yellows can increase appetite. That's why most fast food places use orange and yellow. Actually, a lot of this environmental psychology, all the other fields around us are harnessing this information. And it's one of those things where when it comes to this like evidence-based design and this data, you need to be careful with it because nothing is 100% and hard and fast. And it isn't like we're talking about energy modeling where you can kind of say like, these are my findings and this is how it performs. You can't say that about a building because everyone's going to respond to it differently. But there are definitely things that we can learn and we can quantify and use to create spaces that are better for people. Because at the end of the day, the clients with the big budgets like Google, Amazon, Apple, they're going to take these risks to do kind of this, to make these design moves that are going to potentially help people's productivity, help how they're feeling, help their general mood, because they don't need the promise on a return on investment, because they know even if it doesn't actually do what it's going to do, it's going to look cool and it's going to look nice and it's going to look. But when we're designing something for youth authorities or these healthcare organizations that have very, very tight budgets, they aren't just going off anecdotal information. They want to see an actual evidence-based outcomes. And so that's why we need to do this research and measure it, even if it's still kind of squishy data, so that we have something that we can apply down the ladder to other smaller projects and to get this information out there.
That is also another question that we wanted to ask you about, which is share some details about how you conduct your research. And I think you kind of did in terms of stakeholders. But that is pretty cool though. So I think that's what my next question is going to be. So not many people know about trauma-based design, right? And so if you were to share your work or create some awareness, what what is like a shorthand thing that you would say? This is trauma based design, and then how do you pitch it? Like how do you bring about awareness with people? Because all what you shared right now is makes sense, and yes, we have to use it, and we have to do it with regular design as well, right? It makes perfect sense, but not many people know about it. So what would your pitch be? What would you just say?
I would say trauma informed design is creating spaces that support the human health and experience. And gosh, this is tough because it's based on the lived experience of the individual, but it doesn't re-traumatize them, and it helps support their own self-regulation, emotional and physical regulation.
I feel like all of these topics are so important in just regular architecture. I mean, like, you want to design schools that are cognizant about the community that they're in. You want to design, obviously, healthcare facilities, but also like community centers and parks and so many other community-based institutional buildings that need to incorporate a lot of these elements. And I've never really heard about some of these topics being discussed
Yeah.
outside of healthcare, maybe, or correctional facilities.
It's definitely, I would say, for people who are interested, because it's a new, it's one of those things with all this kind of like, neurodivergence and designing for neurodivergence is also a really big topic. And it's one of those things where it's really important that we're having these conversations. But of course, when we start having these conversations, it becomes all of a sudden a buzzword. I mean, this happened with the sustainability movement, is the
Exactly.
greenwashing. And we're seeing that happening. We don't have a term yet. We need something like greenwashing that's happening with kind of this like mental health. And it's one of those things where it's so important that people are talking about it. But there's also, architects are notorious for just not being great marketers. I don't know. We're just not. We're still fighting over the term, the title architect. So
Right.
we're busy having that conversation, and there's these other folks who maybe aren't necessarily experts in this field, but are really great marketers who are kind of putting out a lot of information, which is good. But what I get worried about is when we start making these blanket statements, and that's been happening with a neurodivergent design and with trauma informed design, and it can just erase other backgrounds and cultures because it's often coming from a very Eurocentric perspective. And so to make these just kind of like blanket statements, like blue, like the idea of that blue paint is going to make everyone feel calming. And there's some truth to that, but it's nuanced. And we're always looking for just like a checklist that we can go down and be like, okay, I did trauma-informed design because there's a view of nature, there's blue paint, and like to just go through a checklist. And that's kind of what I worry about happening, but also wanting to make this more accessible and not gatekeep it, and not be kind of like that typical like master architect who has all the information and only they can perform this work. And so it's finding that balance. But for folks who are interested in this type of work, I will say the Boston Architectural College is developing a course, or I think they're putting out a continuing education course on it, which I'm not super familiar with, but they're a great institution. But if you're just exploring on your own, it would be start with learning about how trauma impacts the body. So there's that book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, that is great and kind of talks about how that's just talking about the body and trauma. And that's really where it needs to start, the education, and then learning about how designers have applied this in the framework. And from there, I think you can get a good understanding. Because there's the neuroscience part of it, which you need to have some understanding of, but that you can pick and choose like how much you want to dive into it. The really important part is the community engagement aspect and learning how to talk to folks to get those lived experiences, and also to understand when it's not the role of the designer to get that information. Um, it may be more appropriate to partner with a social worker or with peer counselors who can then go to those individuals. It isn't our jobs as the designer to necessarily lead all these community engagement sessions. Sometimes it's our job to just be there as a participant or to not be there at all. If it's better for us to not be there because we're not necessarily trusted in that community, that makes sense. And so to let the person who is a trusted figure lead that community engagement, find out the information we need to know, and then bring it back to us. So it's just kind of figuring out what is the best way to get the information you're looking for. And it isn't always going to be you as the architect going in and standing in front of the room and trying to get everyone to trust you.
Yeah. I loved how you brought it back to kind of the basics, because I think understanding the basics is just so important before you get started on this topic and like diving deep in, because I think the basics everyone can apply regardless of what kind of work that they do. And I was going to ask you who needs to be educated on this topic, but now after hearing more about it and hearing what it is, I feel like everyone needs to be educated on the basics of it, educated on just understanding the community, understanding your audience, understanding what kind of they need from this building or this facility, and then kind of moving forward and seeing if this is another layer of another topic that needs to be discussed with the end user or with stakeholders. I know you mentioned a couple of resources, but if you can, any like books or any other resources that you have, any continuing education topics. I know you present at a lot of conferences, so if you have any resources for our users, if you could send that to us, and we'll put it out there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Akhil, anything else before we maybe wrap this up?
Oh yeah, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? It can be anything: work, life, even in trauma informed design. What is the best piece of advice?
Let's see. I don't know if I can say it's the best piece of advice, but I think something I learned early on is identify the people in your career that you really admire. And you obviously don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket per se, because everyone's human. But I identified someone at my very first job who I really respected the way he spoke to clients. And so he always CC'd me on everything, but he's someone who he's still in my life. I still am in contact with him. But he had this way of speaking to clients that was assertive, but not domineering. And when clients got difficult, he just had this beautiful way of, without taking any blame and without being aggressive, of just saying what needed to be said. And I think it's so important to identify people like that in your life and just observe them. Try to take in as much as you can. Because I know I'm a sensitive, reactive person. And so the other thing is to wait a day to respond. So I guess that's
Sounds
a good
like me.
Because this fellow, Rolf Kielman, shout out to Rolf at Truex Collins, he's still there. He had a really great way of responding to clients. And it's something I still think about when I get an email that I want to write a spicy response back to. I'm like, how would Rolf respond to this? And that helps kind of just bring the temperature down. So that'd be my number one piece of advice.
That's a really good piece of advice. And I think that's a learned soft skill that it takes a really long time, but once you have it, it's going to benefit you in so many ways, not just with clients, but like in your personal life and with coworkers. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna have to go find one of my own now. Well, I really appreciate your time. It was great trying to, understand what you really do. I know this is another buzzword that I've heard in the last couple of years. So thank you for kind of diving deeper and really explaining what it is and how you found your way into it. I think just hearing more about the journey that you have and how you ended up in this realm of architecture was really inspiring, and you kind of keeping people at the center of everything that you do is also really inspiring. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. You asked me in the beginning what I count as measures of success, and I mean this.
Yes.
This is a measure of success to me, and being able to talk about this is, I just get so excited about it. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I just want to add, I honestly didn't know what this meant before this conversation. So I was like, oh, I'm so excited to have somebody explain what this actually is. And so, yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time and being here and educating us, and hopefully everybody else who listens to this podcast,
Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Tell Me More. We hope you found inspiration in Yvonne's story, enough motivation to carve out your own space in the world of AEC. Remember, we're all about the more stories, more growth, more ideas. So until next time, don't forget to tell us more about your journey. Keep pushing the boundaries and keep constructing your dreams.